There's a moment when the ground beneath you doesn't just shift, it dissolves, and you realize the family you thought was your sanctuary was the very source of your chains. What you called love was often control in a gentle mask. What felt like comfort was the hum of your own anxiety, working to maintain peace for everyone but yourself. A silent earthquake begins in every empath's life when they understand their first lessons in connection happened inside a system that traded approval for obedience. It's a soul-level collapse to discover the place meant to nurture your unique self was the primary training ground for emotional manipulation. The family unit is the first universe we ever know. Before any concept of a higher power, we experience our caregivers as the sun, the moon, the very laws of physics. A father's nod becomes the definition of acceptance, a mother's tone, the entire landscape of safety or fear. A child doesn't develop as a separate being, but as an extension of that emotional atmosphere. And if that atmosphere is poisoned by self-absorption, the child learns a brutal equation that worth must be purchased with self-erasure. You begin serving the emotional needs of those around you, predicting their storms before the first cloud appears, as if your survival depended on it. And in many ways, it did. The empath's profound sensitivity usually grows from survival instincts, that heightened perception, that intuitive grasp of unspoken feelings, that ability to calm and understand these aren't just spiritual gifts. They are the brilliant adaptations of a psyche learning to navigate an unstable environment. When your safety depends on reading the hidden signals from emotionally volatile people, your inner world builds sensory equipment tuned to frequencies most people never notice. You mistake this constant vigilance for deep compassion, but underneath it runs a river of pure fear, the terror of abandonment, the silent scream of the child who learned that calm would only return if they could make everyone else happy first. The self-focused family survives on a carefully constructed fiction. It must present an image of perfection to the outside world, while inside it operates on a hidden economy of power. One parent, often wounded by their own unmet longings, becomes the dictator disguised as the martyr. The other may fade into the background, a silent partner in the illusion. The children are cast into fixed roles. The golden child who mirrors the parent's manufactured ideal. The scapegoat who carries the family's hidden shame. And often, the empath who becomes the repairer of every crack but their own. To be the empath in this arrangement is to live as an emotional first responder, eternally cleaning up messes you didn't create. The empath's unconscious adopts a sacred lie, that suffering equals love. This deception, passed down through generations, creates a psychological contract. You operate under the belief that if you can just love deeply enough, purely enough, selflessly enough, you will finally heal the broken people around you. But healing was never your assignment. You are not the savior of your family's darkness. You are its living container, its walking archive. Every suppressed feeling, every buried truth, every unshed tear becomes stored in your nervous system like an artifact from someone else's religion. Yet even within this distortion, there hides a profound purpose. The empath's journey is not merely personal, it is mythical. It echoes the ancient tale of the soul's descent into darkness to reclaim its stolen birthright. It mirrors the story of the one who journeys underground to discover the secret of rebirth. It reflects the pattern of carrying ancestral pain so that new awareness might finally blossom. You were chosen not merely to endure, but to see, to understand the collective wound that runs through humanity. And that revolutionary understanding always begins at home. When you start to recognize that your empathy was programmed by fear, a profound reversal begins. The attention that once flowed outward starts to turn inward. You see that the self-absorbed person's drive for dominance was their way of escaping their own internal chaos, just as your compulsion to fix was your way of avoiding your own power. You were both prisoners of the same unfaced darkness, playing opposite parts in the same tired drama. But the empath's reawakening starts when you stop the performance. When you decide you will no longer play the role of emotional caretaker for your own parents. To separate from such a system is not betrayal. It is the ultimate act of self-honesty. Jung taught that the path to wholeness demands differentiation from the collective, even the collective of the family's founding myth. Every family operates under a shared story. The understanding of who we are, what's allowed, what must remain unspoken. To awaken as an empath is to shatter that story in service of a greater truth. This process feels like dying because it is the death of the false self created to maintain connection. The death of the caregiver who believed boundaries were betrayal. The death of the illusion that love can flourish without truth. In my work, I've witnessed countless souls frozen at this threshold. They speak of guilt as if it were oxygen itself. The guilt of feeling joy while a parent remains unhappy. The guilt of choosing peace when family demands loyalty. The guilt of saying no to a sibling who only appears when in need. But guilt, I explain, is not evidence of moral failure. It is the ghost of the family's control, still whispering in your nervous system. It is the internalized voice that taught you that having a self is abandonment. To find freedom, you must learn to read guilt as a compass. Every time you feel its weight, you are approaching the border of your liberation. The self-focused family operates as a psychological vortex, not because it intends destruction, but because it fears its own emptiness. The narcissist cannot bear the void within, so they must fill it with admiration, drama, or control. They use the empath as a living mirror, requiring constant reflection of their manufactured identity. The empath, conditioned to equate love with compliance, becomes the perfect source, luminous, forgiving, endlessly available. And so the ancient pattern repeats. The taker consumes, the giver diminishes, both avoiding the terrifying emptiness of their own unhealed pain. But something miraculous occurs when the empath turns their gaze inward, when the awareness that was constantly scanning others for danger begins to examine the self for truth. You start to discover that beneath your compassion lies deep resentment, beneath your gentleness, righteous anger, beneath your patience, complete exhaustion. These are not signs of failure. They are the unlived emotions that were forbidden in your early world. They are the missing colors of your emotional spectrum. To reclaim them is to reclaim your entire self, not the image that pleases, but the whole being that includes both light and shadow. We're often told that family is where we first learn to connect, but for the empath, it's also where we first learn to disappear. The most sacred no is the one that allows your soul to breathe again. The journey back to yourself requires returning to that moment of disappearance and choosing differently. You must let the inner child, the one who mastered survival by tracking every emotional weather change, finally rest. Tell that child, you no longer need to anticipate. You no longer need to repair. You are safe now. Only then can empathy transform from servitude into wisdom. True empathy doesn't require self-sacrifice. It flows from the self that knows sacrifice intimately. You may grieve deeply as this understanding dawns. You might feel your foundation crumbling because your identity was built upon devotion. Who are you if you're not the fixer, the good one, the redeemer of others? This is the sacred emptiness, the same void the narcissist feared, but which you must now welcome. In that void, you will encounter the original pattern of your being, the divine image that needs no approval, fears no rejection. It is in this meeting that empathy becomes authentic power and relationship becomes true freedom. There comes a crucial point in every soul's evolution when seeing clearly feels like treason. The awakening empath looks at the people who raised them, the mother who wept when questioned, the father who enforced silence with charm or force, the siblings who turned need into coercion, and understands that love was conditional upon emotional servitude. This realization is initially unbearable. It feels like profaning something holy. You were taught that family is sacred, and in its essence, it is. But what is sacred can become idolatry when worshipped blindly. To question the family story is to risk expulsion. Yet it is precisely that exile that gives birth to consciousness. The serpent in Eden wasn't evil. It was the catalyst for awareness, the voice that whispered, "See for yourself." When the empath begins to see, they often turn that vision inward with brutal judgment. "It must be my fault," they insist. "I should have been stronger, more loving, less sensitive." But sensitivity was never the flaw. It was the mirror that reflected what others refused to see. In self-absorbed systems, truth-tellers are always punished. The child who names the unspoken becomes the container for the family's hidden shame. You realize that every family has a collective shadow, a secret room of repressed feelings and forbidden realities. The narcissist projects that shadow onto the empath, who then spends years trying to process emotions that were never theirs to carry. They feel shame for another's arrogance, guilt for another's cruelty, anxiety for another's instability. They absorb these psychological toxins until their own soul becomes a mosaic of borrowed suffering. This is why the empath often moves through life in a state of profound fatigue. They're not just tired from giving, they're haunted by energies deposited in them before they could consent. The narcissist's unconscious operates parasitically. It cannot process its own darkness, so it seeks out hosts who will carry it for them. The empath, driven by attachment and fear of abandonment, becomes that host. They call this love. I call it violation. This isn't metaphorical. The psyche functions through projection, and where projection exists, energetic merging occurs. The empath's energy field becomes a screen where others display their unhealed wounds. This is why detachment feels so violent. You're peeling away layers of psychic binding that were mislabeled as affection. Many misunderstand self-realization. They see it as self-improvement, a form of spiritual refinement. But true self-realization is not polite. It is a revolution of the soul against every internalized oppressor. When the empath begins this process, they encounter an inner voice, the internal parent, fashioned from the tones and gestures of those who once held power over them. This voice claims, "You are selfish. You've abandoned your duty. You owe them." It masquerades as conscience, but is actually the ruling authority of the family's closed system. To challenge it triggers primal panic because your core identity was once built upon its approval. Yet this confrontation is essential. You cannot be whole until you dethrone this inner tyrant. Consider the dream of a client from years ago. In her dream, she stood in her childhood kitchen, but the walls were made of mirrors. Her mother appeared, weeping. "Don't leave me. If you go, I'll cease to exist." The woman turned to leave, but as she walked, her reflection in the mirror smiled, though her real face streamed with tears. She woke trembling. What she hadn't yet understood was that her reflection represented the persona she'd created for her mother's survival, the compliant self who smiled through pain, who embraced suffering as duty. To leave the house of mirrors is to allow that false reflection to die. This is the empath's first true awakening. In such moments, grief becomes illumination. You mourn not only the parents you had, but the parents you dreamed of, the ones who might have loved without conditions. This grieving is crucial. If you bypass it, you remain tethered to the hope that one day they'll change, that your love will finally transform them. But awakening requires release. To become yourself, you must surrender the fantasy of saving them. You cannot wake others by remaining asleep beside them. When you stop taking responsibility for others, you return their destiny to them. You give them the dignity of their own pain, which is the only teacher that ever brings genuine change. The empath's greatest vulnerability is spiritual bypassing. You tell yourself, I forgive them because I understand. But if forgiveness comes before boundaries, it's merely repression disguised as virtue. You cannot transcend what you haven't faced. To forgive prematurely is to silence your own wound to maintain an image of goodness. But the soul cares nothing for image. What remains unhealed will seek expression through physical illness, chronic worry, or the repetition of destructive relationships. You'll keep attracting the same essential dynamic, the charismatic narcissist, the wounded manipulator, the subtle controller, until the pattern becomes intolerable. Only then does the empath finally speak the sacred word. No. No is not rejection. It is revelation. It is the self's voice claiming its sovereignty. When you refuse to be used, you're affirming your connection to your own sacred worth. You're recognizing that empathy without boundaries is self-abandonment. The narcissist will experience your boundary as an attack because it shatters their illusion of total control. They'll accuse you of coldness, cruelty, betrayal, and for a time, the empath will believe them because their nervous system has been wired to equate conflict with danger. But persistence brings clarity. When the storm of guilt passes, you begin to see the pattern not as personal, but as archetypal. You see that every family, every culture enacts the same drama between power and compassion, control and surrender, the will to dominate and the will to connect. Self-realization means becoming conscious of the underlying pattern, so you're no longer doomed to live it unconsciously. If you look closely, you'll see that narcissism isn't the opposite of empathy. It's its distorted reflection. The narcissist's obsession with self is a warped mirror of the empath's self-erasure. Both represent deviations from authentic being. In reality, each carries the potential for the other. The empath suppresses their rightful power. The narcissist suppresses their capacity for vulnerability. Healing begins when you recognize this relationship. The traits you find repulsive in them live dormant within you, and the qualities they exploit in you are missing in themselves. This isn't about moral equivalence. It's about psychological completion. To hate the narcissist is to remain bound to them. To understand them is to reclaim the fragments of your own denied strength. The path to freedom is paradoxical. You must descend before you can ascend. In dreams, this descent often takes the form of a labyrinth. Hallways echoing with ancestral voices calling your name. Doors opening into rooms steeped in the scent of childhood. Mirrors showing faces both familiar and strange. At the labyrinth's center sits the archetypal Great Mother, not your biological mother, but the primordial source of all existence. She contains both nourishment and consumption, creation and destruction. To meet her is to understand that the family was merely her outer manifestation. The narcissistic parent was one face of her overwhelming presence. But now, as a conscious individual, you must face her and declare, I reclaim my life. The Great Mother won't release you easily. She'll test your commitment, your courage, your willingness to stand alone. She'll send guilt as her final messenger. Yet if you persist, if you can bear the solitude that comes with authenticity, something miraculous occurs. The child within you, once frozen in fear, begins to sing. This song isn't of rebellion, but of homecoming. You understand that freedom doesn't mean cutting ties. It means relationship without enmeshment. You can offer love without losing yourself, provide care without collapsing, extend generosity without being depleted. The empath becomes a conscious channel, no longer a passive receptacle. You become the alchemist who transforms suffering into clear seeing. And one question remains. What about the family? What about those who remain in the trance? You cannot wake them through argument. The language of the soul isn't reason, but symbol. Your own transformation will communicate more powerfully than any explanation. When you embody wholeness, you disrupt the collective pattern. Some will reject you for it, others will observe and follow. Each person who liberates themselves from a narcissistic lineage heals the ancestral line a little more. The ancestors who once transmitted pain begin to find peace because consciousness completes what history could not. You break the cycle not through retaliation but through evolution. The empath who has faced their family's shadow becomes a new archetype, the healed healer who no longer mends through depletion but through established presence. Your empathy is no longer an automatic reaction to threat. It is the quiet power of pure awareness. You no longer need to predict moods because you reside in reality. You can feel another's suffering without merging with it because you have fully acknowledged your own. The narcissistic trap loses its power not because you've escaped it, but because you've seen through it. Illusion cannot bind someone who has made peace with darkness. When the empath crosses the threshold of understanding, a subtle but profound shift occurs. The familiar cycles of people-pleasing and intervention begin to fade, but simultaneously, the identity that once gave meaning to your existence also dissolves. You no longer know who you are without others' pain to define you. This feeling of being lost isn't regression. It is spiritual passage. The psyche, stripped of its old dependencies, begins its necessary rebuilding. This is what mystical traditions call the dark night of the soul, the liminal space between ending and beginning, where the manufactured self dissolves and the authentic self starts to breathe. You may feel hollow at first, as if your life has lost its purpose. The phone may stay silent, the home quiet, the rituals of care now empty of meaning. For someone who has lived attuned to others' emotional pulses, silence feels like abandonment. But it's in this silence that the sacred speaks. Beneath the world's noise lies a forgotten rhythm, your own heartbeat, your own longing. You begin to notice that peace isn't the absence of feeling, but the presence of coherence. Where your empathy was once scattered outward like light through a prism, it now gathers into a single, steady flame. You're learning what it means to feel without being consumed. The unconscious, however, doesn't readily surrender its treasured lessons. When the empath stops absorbing external chaos, the internal turmoil surfaces. All the repressed feelings, anger, grief, envy, the desire for justice come rushing back. You may think you're regressing, but you're merely meeting the parts of yourself that were exiled long ago. These are the emotions deemed unacceptable in your family's story. The narcissist disowned them. You absorbed them. Now they return, demanding recognition not as enemies but as lost aspects seeking integration. This is shadow work, not a theoretical exercise, but a necessary descent into your own depths. One client described a recurring vision. She walks through her childhood home, but it's flooded with water up to her knees. Her mother stands at the top of the stairs, calling her name. But when she looks down, she sees her reflection in the water. It's not her face, but her mother's. Every night, she tries to climb the stairs, but feels herself sinking deeper. This vision captures a universal truth. Until we process the emotional inheritance of the past, we remain submerged in the ancestral psyche. The empath's task isn't to avoid the flood, but to transmute it, to convert the inherited emotional current into clear awareness. To do this, you must reclaim the power trapped in your own shadow, that repressed anger. It was your will, twisted into guilt. That envy, It was your desire for recognition, disguised as false humility. That fear, it was your intuition, silenced by compliance. These emotions aren't inherently negative. They're raw psychological energy awaiting integration. The empath who learns to wield them becomes truly powerful. No longer catering to others' emotional demands, you begin to shape reality through the clarity of your perception. The same sensitivity that once trapped you now becomes your inner compass, guiding you toward authentic expression. You no longer feel for others, you feel with them without being overwhelmed by their emotional field. The narcissistic trap loses its grip because you've withdrawn your unconscious consent. You no longer automatically play the healer in their drama. You see the pattern for what it is, an archetypal exchange between light and shadow, and by seeing it, you break the spell. This is awareness's profound function. What is, fully seen, loses its power to control. The narcissist's dominance depended on your unconscious participation. Once you become conscious, the trance is broken. You may still feel compassion, but it's no longer entangled with obligation. Connection becomes luminous, not transactional. At this stage, many empaths experience a new kind of solitude, the solitude of self-reliance. You're no longer enmeshed in the old matrix, but you haven't yet found your new community. This transitional space is sacred. It's where individual uniqueness ripens into authentic spirituality. The empath who once absorbed collective pain now begins to channel collective wisdom. You become a conduit not for others' emotions, but for foundational truth. The same sensitivity that once made you vulnerable now makes you perceptive. You begin to feel the pulse of humanity itself, its longing, its delusions, its hidden sacredness, not as a burden, but as a calling. But beware, the ego will try to claim this ability. It will whisper, now you're the awakened one, the universal healer. This is the narcissist's shadow, returning in new clothing. True transformation is humble. It doesn't seek followers or validation. It seeks union. The healed empath becomes invisible, not because they're unseen, but because they no longer need to be seen. Their being communicates without words. They no longer absorb others' pain. They reflect the possibility of liberation. When someone stands in such a presence, they feel both safe and challenged, because the unconscious recognizes wholeness when it meets it. Let's explore this transformation more deeply. In every initiation myth, there's a moment when the hero descends into darkness, is broken apart, and reassembled in new form. This breaking is psychological, the deconstruction of all constructed identities. The empath must face the archetype of the wounded healer and release it. As long as you identify with your injuries, you remain captive to them. The moment you state, I am no longer the one who fixes, you create space for the sacred to operate through you. Healing then becomes organic, not calculated. It unfolds through your presence, not your effort. Imagine standing before your family again, not physically, but in your inner vision. See each face clearly. The mother who played vulnerable, the father who demanded tribute, the sibling who thrived on attention. Notice what feelings arise, but don't engage, don't fix, don't explain, don't justify, simply observe. This is awareness's inherent power, to see without merging. As you hold this inner gaze, something begins to shift. Their voices grow distant, their capacity to control diminishes. And in their place arises a quiet empathy, not for their actions, but for their limited vision. You recognize that they too were bound, caught in the same generational cycle. The narcissist isn't evil. They're unconscious. And the empath's emergence into consciousness isn't retaliation. It is remembrance. In that moment, you may feel a presence behind you, the true self, the eternal pattern that has been guiding you throughout. It communicates not with words, but with recognition. You were never meant to be their reflection. You are the light that reveals the reflection. This understanding changes everything. You see that your innate sensitivity was never a flaw, but an inner guide leading to deeper perception. Empathy in its highest form isn't emotional entanglement. It is spiritual clarity, the ability to perceive the sacred essence in every being, including yourself. As this insight deepens, your physical being begins to change. You breathe differently. Your nervous system, once tense in anticipation of others' emotional states, begins to relax. The hypervigilance dissolves into stillness. You discover that peace isn't achieved, it is remembered. You start to live in alignment with your own internal rhythms. When sadness emerges, you allow it. Expression. When anger arises, you let it burn clean. When joy appears, you don't fear its departure. You become both observer and participant, container and contained. You've entered what Jung called the transcendent function, the reconciliation of opposites within the psyche. And gradually, life begins to respond. New connections form, not from need, but synchronicity. You attract those whose frequency matches authenticity. Conversations gain depth. Silence becomes communion. You begin to affect others, perhaps unknowingly, through the quality of your presence.
Those still trapped in narcissistic patterns will be drawn to you, some seeking guidance, others testing your resolve, but your energy field will no longer fragment.
You stand as living proof that unconditional connection is possible. What was once the empath's vulnerability, permeability, feeling, softness, now becomes sacred technology. You see hidden currents beneath communication, foundational themes behind events. You navigate the world not as a crisis manager, but as an interpreter of symbols. You understand that every encounter is a conversation between souls, every conflict an opportunity for evolution. You no longer react automatically. You respond consciously. You no longer seek external harmony. You embody it internally. This is wholeness's essence. When you finally emerge from the labyrinth of the family shadow, the air feels different, thin, clear, remarkably pure. You breathe not from anxiety, but from truth. There's no applause here, no external validation, only the quiet pulse of your essence reclaiming sovereignty. You see that true healing was never about returning to who you were before the wound. It was about becoming someone who could never again be diminished by that injury. The empath who once bent to the tyranny of others' emotions now walks upright, anchored by inner quiet. This quiet isn't emptiness. It is self-possession. It's in this quiet that you begin to grasp connection's true nature. Connection isn't the anxious management of another's distress, nor the automatic forgiveness of their cruelty. Connection is the recognition of the sacred in both yourself and the other, unclouded by illusion. The narcissist was fundamentally incapable of offering you that because they couldn't see the sacred in themselves. They mistook focused attention for love and control for intimacy. Their tragedy was unconsciousness. Your vulnerability was compassion born of sorrow. But compassion born of sorrow isn't true connection. It diminishes both one dependent, the other positioned as superior. Authentic compassion, however, is connection without attachment. It sees suffering and understands it's not your burden to carry. You begin to feel gratitude for the very dynamics that once shattered you. The manipulation becomes your initiation. Their control attempts, your awakening. Their coldness, your catalyst. You see now that the soul often chooses difficult conditions to cultivate its depth. Without the narcissist's harsh reflection, you might have remained comfortable but unaware. Suffering was your teacher, but awareness is your graduation. The wound that once defined you has become a portal through which light enters the world. You're no longer merely healing, you're transmuting, converting poison into medicine, darkness into conscious light. One evening, you might sit in silence and recall a specific childhood moment, the look in your parents' eyes when you tried to assert yourself. The sudden withdrawal of warmth, the subtle punishment. Previously, this memory would trigger longing or rage. Now it sparks a different response, understanding. You see the wounded child in that parent, terrified of exposure, reenacting an ancient script written by previous generations. You softly whisper, I release you, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve freedom. Forgiveness in its purest form isn't reconciliation, it is release from repetition. When you forgive, you're no longer bound to the cycle of reaction. You've stepped out of the ancestral drama and become the author of your own story. As your awareness expands, you begin to perceive the collective field, the vast web of unconscious energy connecting all beings. You sense that the family pattern was never just personal. It was a microcosm of humanity's struggle with self-worth and self-forgetting. The narcissist and the empath are universal archetypes. The sovereign and the servant, the sun and the moon, the false god and the devotee. When you integrate these polarities within your own psyche, you contribute to the whole's healing. Your personal freedom becomes a cosmic event. Every choice you make towards self-awareness over guilt, authentic expression over approval, shifts the human psyche's fundamental frequency. You may find yourself drawn to new forms of creative expression, writing, art, teaching, healing, not because you need to prove your worth, but because life itself wants to flow through you. The energy that was once blocked now moves freely. The empathy that once drained you now fuels your creativity, your insight, your ability to connect deeply without losing your center. People may say, you have such a calming presence, or you see things others miss, and they're right, for you've passed through the fire and learned silence's deep language. You faced family's great illusion and discovered it was guarding treasure, not threat. In dreams, your childhood home structure may return, but this time it's different. The rooms fill with light, the mirrors no longer distort. The mother figure smiles without conditions. The father's voice is steady. The air is no longer heavy. This dream isn't fantasy. It is symbolic resolution. The psyche, having integrated its split-off parts, now projects wholeness instead of division. You wake not with lack, but with inner peace. The inner family has been healed. The inner mother, nurturing but not smothering. The inner father, protective but not controlling. The inner child, playful but not afraid. This is redemption's true meaning. When you meet others still caught in the narcissistic dynamic, you no longer feel the urge to save them. You offer presence instead of persuasion. You know every soul must awaken in its own time. Some will cling to the trance until their suffering ripens into readiness. You honor that process, for you once walked it yourself. This humility protects you from the heal's subtle arrogance. Healing isn't a hierarchy. It is remembrance. The healed empath remembers being lost, and so keeps compassion without condescension. Now your empathy becomes a sacred tool. You can engage with another's pain without absorbing it. Feel their confusion without losing your clarity. You see the archetypal patterns beneath their personal story, the child seeking love, the parent demanding obedience, the lover fearing loss. You recognize that every person acts out a chapter of the same collective human story, and you offer a gentle mirror, not from detachment, but from deep understanding. Awareness no longer separates you. It connects you to all life's fundamental reality. You realize that to be conscious is to participate in the divine's evolution within humanity. The narcissistic prison, once so solid, now seems fragile, a structure built of mirrors reflecting only emptiness. You see how the outer world operates on similar delusions. Nations driven by grandiosity, leaders demanding blind loyalty, groups sacrificing individuality for belonging. The family system is a microcosm of the larger human condition. Your personal awakening becomes a lens through which you see modern society's underlying story. Still addicted to control, still afraid of solitude, still mistaking appearance for essence. But now you know, the most important revolution begins within. As you move through life with this deep knowing, even ordinary moments radiate significance. The way light falls on a surface, the sound of rain against glass, the quiet space between heartbeats, everything feels alive, interconnected. You no longer need to search for meaning. Meaning arises spontaneously, like breath. You understand Jung's truth that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And who you are isn't an empath defined by past pain, but awareness itself, the eternal witness playing the temporary role of a human being. There will be moments when old wounds echo, when the family story's ghost brushes against your mind, but you'll recognize it now. You'll gently acknowledge it and say, I know you. Awareness turns even the shadow into an ally. For the one who sees, nothing is without purpose. Every scar becomes wisdom, every memory a teaching. You carry no resentment, only deep understanding, that alchemical force that turns personal tragedy into universal insight. You become, in the truest sense, your own inner parent, both the nurturing mother and the steadfast father within. And so you live with quiet intensity, moving among those still asleep, not as a moral teacher, but as a living question. Your empathy, once automatic, now radiates by choice. You don't speak of spiritual realization because your life has become the teaching. You stand as evidence that consciousness can emerge from constraint, that connection can transcend fear, that even the deepest emotional wounds can become openings to the sacred. The narcissistic prison was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to initiate you. For it's only by experiencing illusion that truth reveals its essence. And perhaps one day you'll sit across from someone who mirrors your former self, anxious, drained, lost in a family labyrinth that demanded loyalty instead of love. They'll speak through tears, and you'll listen with deep, quiet knowing. You won't rescue them, because you know that to rescue is to rob them of their own necessary awakening. Instead, you'll offer the sacred mirror, the kind that doesn't distort, but reflects truth. And in your unwavering presence, they'll glimpse themselves not as broken, but as becoming. And in that moment, the pattern ends. The empath becomes the mirror of the divine, not of the family. This is ultimate freedom. To connect without being bound, to feel without being consumed, to remember without reliving, to walk in the world untouched yet deeply connected. You become awareness's living embodiment, emerging through relationship, proof that the ancestral shadow wasn't a curse, but the cocoon from which your divine nature emerged. And when the night is quiet and you're alone once more, you may whisper into the silence, it was never about them. And the silence will answer, it was always about you remembering. You were never truly trapped, only dreaming. Your sensitivity wasn't a flaw, it was your soul's compass home. If this journey resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to Wake and Win for more content that helps you reclaim your power.